on it.
Sorry about that, David. So LAPD lost it, and we happened to lose it as well. Basically, what's going on here is the type of driving that we were seeing just became too dangerous. And at the end of the day, what are they able to do with him in this case? Is it worth the risk to public safety when he's going to be processed with no bail, not face any jail time, and just be released with a citation? It just doesn't make sense, and so they decided to give it up altogether. Now they're tracking other suspicious individuals who are mixed in with protesters who are moving up and down Van Nuys Boulevard. Some of them are peaceful, but others of them are armed with weapons. We're talking about hammers, we're talking about crowbars, and right now they're looking for somebody armed with a knife in the middle of the crowd. We were on the other corner that you're looking at right here, the northeast corner, and somebody randomly took a bottle of water and poured it on a bunch of protesters. These are agitators who are trying to get these crowds riled up and looking to just basically distract the police. That's the name of the game. You distract the police, and then they go on their crime spree. It's a trend we've been seeing, and the pattern is not really changing.
This is Mark Brown, by the way, along with Colleen Sullivan, getting ready for Eyewitness News at 5. When you talk about that pattern, trying to distract the police, trying to rile up the protesters, there's a saying, it's an old saying, don't fall for the okie doke. And if they don't, then it'll be all right. But you'll have to see whether that takes place as we're watching these large groups and looters that are looting that is taking place. This is Eyewitness News at 5 and our continuing coverage of the protests against police violence and the occasional lawlessness that has erupted, that has caused a lot of damage in a lot of communities in Southern California. Chris, go ahead, continue.
Yeah, we're just keeping an eye on this group right here. Again, LAPD has been pretty patient most of the day. We saw LAPD, one of the commanders actually talking to an organizer, allowing them to protest a while ago, but the crowd has really dispersed into different intersections and different corners. This happens to be Victory and Van Nuys Boulevard. All of this started earlier today around noon over at the Van Nuys Civic Center, where a crowd of 100 protesters grew to about 2, maybe closer to 300 at one point. The crowd grew throughout the day, and as we went on the air at around 3 o'clock, things started to go sideways. There were agitators who were starting to vandalize property and then branched off and started looting businesses up and down Van Nuys Boulevard. A large gang of looters formed, and they started going business to business. We saw a pharmacy being looted. We saw dozens of looters jumping out of a Boost mobile phone store, and then we saw another medical marijuana shop being looted as well. One of the people inside that shop actually chased out the looters with a fire extinguisher, and we've seen those looters basically scatter across the neighborhood here in this part of Van Nuys. LAPD doing their level best to try and keep up and take any looters that they can into custody. And just, you saw on our air a few minutes ago, they actually caught up with the original group that looted that pharmacy and chased them in a black Charger through the streets of Van Nuys, and eventually lost them. They just decided to give it up, just decided it wasn't worth it. The way he was driving, Mark, I'm not sure if you saw it, but he was doing ridiculous speeds through the streets of Van Nuys.
We are about, an hour away from curfew in the city of Los Angeles. So within an hour, there will be more tools available for the police to try to restore order and keep the looters from doing what they're doing, keep the vandals from doing what they are doing. The protesters who are there to protest police violence against African Americans are going to have to make a decision at 6 o'clock whether they continue to protest and demonstrate or whether they observe the curfew and prepare for tomorrow to begin anew.
Absolutely. Well, we are continuing our live team coverage. Let's go to Rob Hayes. Rob, you're live with more on the situation in your position right there.
Yeah, that's right. We're in Hollywood at Sunset and Vine. You can see a good-sized protest here right in front of the Chase Bank. It's a Black Lives Matter organization has put this together. This has been a totally peaceful gathering right now. You can see them clapping and chanting, and what you'll notice they'll do, like a lot of times when they get the light, the walk signal, they'll come out into the street they'll kneel down, and it looks like they're blocking traffic, but as soon as the light changes, they move back to the crowd. So they're letting traffic go. They're being very, I would say, courteous to all the people driving by. And you'll hear the horns honking here. It's a lot of support for the group that's out here. And one interesting thing we should point out, Jamie, if you just scan right to left here, you won't see any LAPD officers in sight. You will see, however, some National Guardsmen, like right across the street here. They're just standing. They're not interacting with any of the protesters. They're just standing by. And it's been a very peaceful, successful protest so far. So things are going very smoothly here in Hollywood.
Going to keep an eye on your position, and we have this to show you as well right now. LAPD Commander Corey Polka taking a knee along with protesters outside the Laugh Factory on Sunset Boulevard. It is extraordinary.
Okay, listen up. Listen up. Okay, shut up. Listen up, please. If I take a kneel with you guys, will you give me your verbal acknowledgement that this is a peaceful matter? I will be a model. Take a knee. Take a knee. Get down. Everybody down. Yeah. Everybody take a knee. Everyone go. Let's go. Take a knee.
Take a knee!
Even if you got a camera.
Together!
Okay, we stand together.
And kneel together.
Okay, thank you. So within the next 30 to 40 minutes, if you peacefully go about returning back to where you came from with the same honor you came here, I will give you my commitment and honor that you will not see police officers in front of you. Fair enough?
Commander Corey Polka. If the name sounds familiar to you, it is not only for that extraordinary act he just demonstrated in front of protesters, it is that he is a survivor of COVID-19. He has been featured here on Eyewitness News, donating plasma so that others might also survive the coronavirus.
Absolutely. And we heard earlier today in a press conference with LAPD Chief Michael Moore saying these are complex issues and challenges. And he did say he and his department, they are committed to reform. So they are certainly all working together. Protests are also planned in Anaheim tonight. Orange County reporter Tony Cabrera is live in Anaheim with a look at what is happening right now. Tony?
Mark, Colleen, I'm right outside City Hall right now where a protest just started. You can see probably about 100 people out here. They've got their signs out. This is Anaheim Boulevard. And police, they do have a presence here, including the Sheriff's Department. You see a van just pulled up with more deputies getting out just across the street there on the corner. And a few other deputies further down the street there. That's the Center Street Promenade where businesses earlier today, they boarded it up. So if you walk down that street, you'll just see that they're all boarded up. They were out there preparing for what could come, but so far we've seen nothing but peaceful protests here. And not too far from where we're standing, about a mile and a half away, there was another protest earlier today that was put on by educational leaders here in Anaheim. They said they saw the flyer for the protest that we're standing at right now, and they said, you know what, we're going to take a different tone. This is going to be a peaceful protest for our students, for our youth to come out, to have a different tone, to set a different tone, because he said he saw the flyer for the current protest that we're out had a profanity towards police, and so he's saying we're also going to follow the curfew set in Anaheim. We're going to encourage our youth to go home at 6 o'clock when it goes into effect. Now back out here live here at City Hall outside, we see the protesters here, and if we pan over to City Hall, the entrance there, we can see PD out there ready for what is to come. They are expecting a peaceful protest. They're encouraging the peaceful protest, saying, yes, that is okay, but the moment it does possibly turn violent, they say, that's when they have to declare an unlawful assembly. So they're hoping that doesn't happen, but they say they are ready for any of that to happen out here. For now, we are live in Anaheim. Tony Cabrera, ABC 7 Eyewitness News.
All right, Tony, thank you. We're going to go back to Hollywood now, and our entertainment reporter Carl Schmid is out there, and he is here to tell us what we're looking at here. Carl, where are you?
Hey, Mark and Colleen. I'm on Sunset right now. We're heading east, back towards Vine. I've been with this protest since it really began a couple of hours ago, and I have to tell you, it's been extremely peaceful. As you heard earlier, they are taking their knee when they get to a red light. When the light turns green, they're getting back up and moving. There's very little police presence right here on Sunset at the moment. And certainly if I go up there, you'll see quite a generous sized crowd. But so far, you know, apart from the odd bit of profanity, it's been extremely peaceful. I see just ahead, if I flip the camera and try and get focus for you, I'm not sure how well I can do as I'm moving. Not so great, but we do see the National Guard has pulled up just in front. So they're sort of leading the way. But right now, as this rally moves back towards Sunset and Vine to meet up with the other group, everything's very peaceful, very ordinary.
Yeah, Carl, you know that in other crowds and in other locations, obviously, we've seen people trying to agitate, trying to either pick fights with people, trying to cause trouble, trying to branch off and break windows. Have you seen any of that in the crowd of people that you're with?
Do you know what? I haven't. There was a minor scuffle earlier. We've got a car here stuck in the... I'm sorry about the focus there, guys, as we move through, but no, as I said, there was a slight scuffle earlier back up at Hollywood and Highland. There was a gentleman trying to get through the police barricade to his home. The police descended on him pretty quickly, but interestingly enough, the crowd and the protest leaders really helped disperse that little altercation, and they moved on and carried on. So they went back down Hollywood Boulevard to La Brea, down La Brea, and as I said, we are now heading east on Sunset towards Sunset and Vine, where I believe Rob Hayes is.
Right, I do think Rob Hayes is there, and he's been talking about the same thing that Carl's been talking. Carl, your video froze up for a second, but it is remarkable to see everyone. This has been a very peaceful, a very motivating rally where people are being mindful of the others in the community, i.e. businesses or anybody who's trying to navigate their way around within their cars. But again, very interesting to see, because it's not the same everywhere else, because we've been following breaking news in Van Nuys where looters, they broke off from a peaceful protest. They have been breaking into stores. It is a very fluid situation. We have been continuing to monitor it. Air 7 HD was over the scene just a short time ago where a Boost mobile phone business and a medical marijuana store, they were both broken into along Van Nuys Boulevard, and a large group of peaceful protesters gathered nearby in front of the Van Nuys Civic Center. And at one point, police on the scene, they were calling it an unlawful assembly, but then a short time later, officers met with the protesters, and they've all been allowed to continue a peaceful protest.
And we are seeing protests popping up on freeways too. This was the scene on the 405 freeway a short time ago. This demonstration was scheduled to take place at the Federal Building in Westwood. Somehow demonstrators ended up walking onto the 405 on-ramp and onto the freeway. Several of them spread across lanes of the freeway. They carried a banner. Traffic disrupted until the CHP showed up. Everybody did leave the freeway ultimately peacefully.
All right, well, now we're going to go to the skies and Air 7 HD live over Hollywood, again over this peaceful protest. Let's go to Chris Christie with the details. Chris?
Colleen, we're taking a look at several hundred protesters. I would say this group much larger, actually, than the one that we've been following in Van Nuys. And once again, as you mentioned, extremely peaceful. This one started near the 101 over on Hollywood Boulevard. Now we're traveling eastbound on Sunset Boulevard. And you can see the volume of people out here, and they really it's really grown over the course of the afternoon. It's right near Highland is what we're looking at. You can see a lot of signs, a lot of peaceful marching, protesters of all ages, all races, in solidarity here as they make their way through Hollywood. We're going to continue to keep an eye on them. Law enforcement is monitoring their movements, but they've been so peaceful they are not confronting them or forming any kind of a skirmish line whatsoever. They're letting them move at their own pace along Sunset Boulevard. Reporting live from Air 7 HD, I'm Chris Christie, ABC 7 Eyewitness News.
Yeah, Chris. Well, we've just been talking with Rob Hayes and Carl Schmidt about the way that this protest has been going. We see that they're obviously having to sort of navigate with the cars, and we see a very large group of LAPD cruisers right there. But it does, for the most part, seem we've been following these protests for the last several days, and you have certainly seen many other protests not looking quite so peaceful.
Each group kind of takes on their own profile, you know, and this is certainly on the peaceful side for sure. It's actually a welcome sight to cross over the hill compared to the chaos that we just came from, that was so distressing to watch over in Van Nuys, and so heartbreaking to see all of the looting and agitators really upsetting what was otherwise a peaceful protest. 99% peaceful protesters. It just took a couple of bad apples to really throw things into chaos up in the valley. In the meantime, you can see this group is interacting with traffic. LAPD does not want to see that, but right now they are being left to their own devices because of how peaceful they've been and how busy LAPD is in other parts. It just gives you an idea of just how busy LAPD is on a normal day. This group would be escorted with dozens of officers. Instead, there are literally only about a handful of LAPD units escorting this crowd through the intersections.
And that intersection where you are right now, what is that cross street?
That is Sunset at Highland. They are moving right through the intersection of Highland. Now you do see some cars that are surrounded by protesters. During the course of these protests, we've seen a lot of drivers very supportive of the cause and very tolerant of the traffic delays. But it just takes somebody to lose their patience, and you don't want to see that. That's what we really are worried about when we see cars interacting with so many pedestrians. You just want to see those cars stay still, stay calm, let the protesters pass, and then move through the intersection. Everybody here appears to be very tolerant and very patient with what's going on here.
Well, this is indicative of not only the purpose of this, which is to protest and demonstrate against the deaths of African Americans in particular at the hands of police officers, but it's also indicative of the fact that without the bad actors who seem to infiltrate these demonstrations, they go off peacefully and well. Because you've got, how many people would you say are down there? A couple thousand at this point? I mean, I can't estimate crowds, but
I think I said a few hundred. I think you're probably much closer, probably between 1,000 and 2,000, probably in the 1,500 range. I mean, at one point a minute ago, as they were condensed, I mean, it really looked like almost the entire block was packed with people. Unfortunately, we're in the middle of a pandemic, and after the empty streets that we've seen over the last 3 months, it's a little jarring to see 1,500 people packed like sardines in any place, any given place. So there is that to worry about. But in the meantime, a lot of them are wearing masks and continuing their peaceful march up Sunset.
All right, Chris Christie, thank you very much for that live report. We're going to go to Veronica Miracle. Veronica Miracle, you were at the scene where we saw that very poignant exchange between the LAPD and the protesters, and all working together, trying to say, we're here, we hear you, we are together, but let's do it peacefully.
Yeah, that's right, Colleen. It was really beautiful. He actually said, okay, I'm going to make a deal with you guys. If I take a knee, will you guys promise me that once curfew hits, you will go home? And everyone said yes. And all right, hi there. Yeah, okay, sorry for the language. So you definitely have some instigators here, but for the most part, everybody is so peaceful. And take a look, the crowd has really, thinned out because the curfew is going to be coming up at 6. We've seen people go home. We see people very satisfied and happy that they feel like they got their message across. They were able to, have one-on-one time with the LAPD. And Sunset here is completely shut down. So at least from, I believe, Hayworth Avenue, beyond Crescent Heights Boulevard a little bit there. So this whole area doesn't have any cars. All of the businesses are boarded up. Right there, you're looking at the iconic Laugh Factory and that sign, "Rest in Peace, George Floyd," people holding flowers. It's very different than what we have seen, when we've seen these protests kind of devolve very quickly. I don't see that happening here at this moment. It's very peaceful in the Hollywood area. We'll send it back to you guys.
okay, thank you very much, Veronica. We've got about 40 43 minutes left to go until the I'm doing the math in my head.
Very
I'm
good.
terrible at math. 43 minutes to go until curfew is in effect in the city of Los Angeles. Philip Palmer is in Van Nuys, where there have been problems. There has been looting. Let's check in with Philip.
Well, right now, these people are peacefully sitting in the intersection of Van Nuys and Victory. They're not the problem. This man has been confronting officers and also protesters. He's not part of the protest, but it shows the difficulty police face because he walks right up in their face, challenging them, then comes back over. Many of the protesters have wanted him to go away. You see that people have decided they want to stay here. My assumption is before long there will be arrests, maybe peaceful arrests just as a show of support for the protest, but they're not, well, let's just see what's happening. You see a little bit of confrontation, but again, they're not supposed to be in the intersection. It's starting to back up traffic. You can look back down this way. You see the police line to my left, so they're here. And down the street now you've got a lot of people here on Van Nuys Boulevard that are being affected by some of the protesters. Many of the protesters have left. Most of the protesters that were organizing have gone, but now you've got these folks who are here in the middle, maybe 24 people, tops. So we'll see how this develops, but right now they're just peacefully sitting in the street, their form of protest, and it doesn't look like they're ready to go away right now. Back to you guys.
All right, Philip. Well, yeah, it looks like things could easily escalate. We have to hope. Again, we heard this yesterday, Mark, that the Santa Monica Police Chief says hope is not a strategy, but we have to hope that it doesn't escalate. We know that you always have some people who just want to instigate some trouble, and you see majority of them are very peaceful out here. And I do feel for the motorists who are trying to get home from their jobs for the most part, and they're being blocked, and it's sort of unfortunate.
Well, it is, but you got to remember what this is about and why these protests are springing up across the country and literally around the world. You've seen protests in Berlin, you've seen them in New Zealand, places like that, and it's all over the death not only of George Floyd, but the situations that have happened in so many American cities over the years, and in particular this last month, the Ahmaud Arbery shooting that was revealed last month, but actually happened back in February, and police and investigators basically sat on the video until it was released to the public, and that's when finally an investigation and an arrest took place of the two men who are accused now of his murder. Breonna Taylor in Louisville, who was gunned down in her own home by police, and then Christian Cooper, who wasn't killed but basically had police called on him, and a woman said erroneously that he was threatening her life, and that could have gotten him killed if there wasn't some proof or evidence that he wasn't doing any of those things. And so it's demonstrations against unequal treatment of people of color, in particular, by police around the country, and so many police officers have echoed what the demonstrators are saying.
Yes, absolutely. We are going to switch gears here. We're going to go to Mayor Eric Garcetti now.
In Minneapolis. We all saw a man's life snuffed out. The promise of his life and the purpose of America that day was met with something fundamentally un-American, inhumane, and that cries out for justice. This morning, George Floyd's brother came before us at the site to speak to America. Passionate, pained, powerful, prayerful. He spoke to us about what happened to his brother. Terrence Floyd said that no one's grief could match his, and how blowing things up and acting out won't solve anything. We won't move the needle in the direction of justice, and certainly won't bring his brother back. And his message echoes for all of us, and to anyone who might hijack this moment and this movement to their own destructive ends. As he put it, let's do this another way. Let's stop thinking that our voices don't matter. And vote. Educate yourself. That's how we're going to hit them, he added, and finally said, and there's a lot of us. I spoke yesterday about the common ground that we found in the midst of our pain. The common ground that African Americans in this country share because of the devastating legacy of slavery and racism, but that every American must own and feel, and I believe we did and do. The good police officers, together with the good people, those who spoke out in a way I had never seen in the history of this country unequivocally, to call it murder, to say that it was wrong, and demand not just justice for George Floyd and his family, but for America in the days moving forward. The Floyd family knows the truth, that the cause of fairness, the drive for equality, the fight to end structural racism, the real reason so many are demonstrating right now on our streets, none of it is advanced by the violent acts of the few. Like you, I've been out there in the streets and I've seen with my eyes, whether it's on TV or on our blocks, that those of us who cry for justice have gone out and overwhelmingly and peacefully, if painfully, express the change that has to continue to come, just as we have in years before and decades before. And this city's evolution has written many of those pages of forward momentum, of a day when the police chief was more powerful than the mayor and couldn't be fired, and spoke about how black people had different veins and that's the reason why they were dying in chokeholds. That was where we were 30 years ago. But now, as we look at the progress we still need to make and the progress that we have made, it is with that spirit that George Floyd's brother gave us that we must move forward, with that mission not just in our hearts, but also in our actions. And I want to say clearly, we are going to continue to do everything we can to restore peace and to keep this city safe. We're throwing everything we have at maintaining the peace, and we're going to throw everything we have on promoting justice, and nobody out there need pick between those two. A curfew will again be in place tonight in our city and our county. It starts, I know it's a little confusing for some, at different times in different parts of the county, but here in the city of Los Angeles, in conjunction with the county-wide one, it begins at 6 p.m. You may have received a different alert from your phone, and that might have been sent from a different city when you're in the city of LA. But our curfew requires that people within the city of Los Angeles stay indoors from 6 p.m. until 6 a.m. tomorrow morning. And there's a curfew in effect across Los Angeles County. This is not a step that anybody takes lightly, but it is done for all of our safety. It's done to protect protesters, it's done to protect families, it's done to protect businesses and workers, and you know what? Most of us fit into many of those categories. So please stay indoors, and please stay safe, and obey the law. You need to go home. For days, we have witnessed demonstrations in over 140 American cities, including ours. And protests are part of a proud tradition of change in this country. We've seen this in Los Angeles in years past to promote the rights of immigrants, of women, of African Americans, to stand up for science and our environment, to do the things that do move our country forward. And if we didn't have those voices or lived in an unfree country, we could not have seen the progress we have made. And I will always put in this work. I told you during the COVID-19 crisis that I and your city government would never stop working for you. And we're not today either. Not just to work for you, but to work to end racism, to address poverty, to make sure that inequality in our city is not a model in this country, but that we erase those things that can divide us and find the ways forward. You've been there alongside, supporting things we've done, from raising the minimum wage to making community college free, to making sure that we have independent investigations of police shootings, to train our officers and folks who have served time together to spend time together mentoring our young people in this city. And there is no question we are not at the peak yet, but we are not at the base of the mountain either. And we have to continue to find the peace in our city that will allow us to take the next step up the mountaintop. Our city has to be clear, though, because we too have been too hard hit in decades past of when violence and looting and the destruction of ourselves happens, it sets us back for years. After the peaceful protests end, when looting and vandalism begins, we have seen this too often, here across the country, in our neighboring cities here in the Southland, and our city and our police department will continue to do the work with our partners to make sure we have a city at peace. Our police department will defend this city from the crimes being committed by those who seek to exploit this moment. Arrests are being made every single day as we speak for anybody who breaks the law, and anybody thinking that it's getting easier out there or that they can get away with it, you're wrong. And I would say to you, don't be dumb. Don't make a mistake that lasts much more than today, but that can stay with you for months and years in your life. Don't do it. We will not stand for violence, for looting, for arson, not today, not ever, no exceptions. Not only because it's wrong, not only because our businesses are barely starting to stand up and those workers that work there need to get a paycheck, but we also know the danger to human lives, and thank God that so far we've not seen in this city the loss of life, but we've come close already. And that can happen to innocent people on the streets, it can happen to our peace officers, and we have to protect life. If, as we've shown in our fight against COVID-19, every life is sacred, let's prove that right now. And we are here as a city to preserve life. Small businesses were hurting long before any looting and vandalism visited them. Employees at these businesses were counting on conditions improving. These businesses are the bedrock of our neighborhoods, our main streets, of building community wealth that doesn't just go into corporate hands, but into local hands, in communities of color, in low-income communities, with immigrant-run businesses, and those businesses that have been in families for a generation or more. They were reeling, they are reeling from the effects of the COVID-19 crisis. Many of the more than 100 of the 120 businesses impacted by the destruction of the last few nights had just brought back their employees and opened their doors to customers for the first time in months. They were beginning to drum up the sales they needed to see a future, to survive. And now they have to contend with property damage, lost inventory. But I want to say that we are here to help, even in these tough moments. The Los Angeles Department of Building and Safety has been conducting safety assessments of buildings to anyone who requests one at no cost. Some damaged buildings may need only to repair glass, and they get a yellow ticket, and that means as soon as it's repaired, you're good to go. And there will be no permits required for those repairs. Others, a much smaller number, have fire damage, and they need a permit when making more extensive repairs. And the Department of Building and Safety will make sure that any plans that are submitted to repair damaged buildings are assigned to a plan checker on that same day and given priority processing. If you're one of those businesses and you don't know where to go, please go to buildla.lacity.org, and we are here to get you back on your feet. Additionally, we will be waiving the certified construction and demolition hauler requirement, so businesses don't have to pay to have debris removed. Our sanitation department will be providing roll-off and dumpster services to help clear out debris quickly. Many of you saw and thanked those city workers that were out there the next morning downtown in the Fairfax area to provide a seamless and no-cost demolition process so small businesses can rebuild faster. And finally, in the coming days, I'll be proposing to the City Council additional financial assistance directly to businesses so that you can bring your employees back, get your stock back, and get back to business. We need to bring our economy back for our businesses, for our workers, for our neighborhoods, for us all. In addition to helping businesses recover, we will support every resident in this city. While many Angelenos wore masks this weekend, I encourage everybody going out to a protest, wear a mask, keep your social distance, and please get a free COVID-19 test. These are available for everybody who's been out there. coronavirus.lacity.org/testing is our site. And the city and county have now provided more than 500,000 free tests with or without symptoms. But if you've been out there, you may be at higher risk, so please sign up. And our largest testing center at Dodger Stadium will be open again tomorrow with thousands of tests, as well as the walk-up location at the Kedron Community Health Center in South Los Angeles. Other sites will remain closed. This is because our testing operation is led and run by volunteers. Those volunteers have not yet signed up to come back, given what's happening in the city. But thanks to the fire department and volunteers from our city staff, we will continue making sure that most of the capacity of those centers will be met at Dodger Stadium and in South LA. We know there are more protests today, and my hope is that they will continue to be peaceful and powerful from beginning to end. And I know the worst things sometimes get on the news, but I saw beautiful images too, of engagement and of restraint, of the ability to exercise our pain and our anger, of police officers who took a knee with protesters, of folks who gave hugs to our National Guard and others. We need to find each other even amidst our pain, and I believe, again, that common ground is something that we hold together. That everybody in uniform and with a badge knows that what happened in Minneapolis is wrong and is committed to not only pushing for justice there, but being part of a coalition of justice here. But for those who are acting criminally, destroying property and stealing, we see you and the police will arrest you. And those who are peacefully protesting, we see you and thank you. The city is stronger because of you. With that, let me turn it over to our Police Chief, Michael Moore, to give an update on what has happened here today, and then we'll hear from Chief Terrazas, and after that, we'll take some questions.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So as to a status check today, where we're at, as for the safety of Los Angeles, last night we saw the full impact of the curfew with our ability to police areas of downtown and particularly and also the west side, but also the valley, where we saw roving groups of individuals that were not compliant with the curfew, and we believe were out to loot and prey upon businesses in our community. And our officers' actions were able to to identify those individuals and make a number of arrests. Last night, just under 700 arrests. And within those 700 arrests were 70 individuals who were either burglarizing or looting, victimizing businesses further. So what that tells me is that two things. We didn't have protests last night. We had criminal acts. We didn't have people mourning the death of this man, George Floyd. We had people capitalizing. His death is on their hands, as much as it is those officers. And that is a strong statement, but I must say that this civil unrest that we're in the midst of, we must turn a corner from people who are involved in violence, people who are involved in preying upon others. The actions last night, I am encouraged for Los Angeles, but I was discouraged for Santa Monica and Long Beach. This morning was a bright morning. It started well. A protest in the Van Nuys area with a group of students that was largely peaceful. Then through the course of that protest, others came involved and looted, attempted and broke in 3 stores. Officers were on scene, made arrests. But again, a protest that we are efforting to support and ensure that people's voices are heard. Social justice that needs to occur, that we can't hear because of the violence. As we move through the evening and presently in the late afternoon, we have a series of unpermitted, some planned marches and groups in various parts of the city. I'm aware of the one on the west side, where at the federal building, it moves onto the freeway. When you move onto the freeway, you jeopardize not only yourselves, but the lives of so many others. And as they're back on the streets, we will be interacting with that crowd, that protest, and that protest is now unlawful. The actions of endangering others creates an unsafe circumstance that just doesn't be simply turned on or off. In Hollywood, we have 3 groups in various parts of Hollywood that are protesting and largely peaceful. It's my hope that they'll continue. But if they do not, we have ample resources around and about them, monitoring them, and that we will act. Lastly, we had a protest that started here at our headquarters, our police headquarters, and then moved to City Hall. Unfortunately, I was actually at a press conference with our law enforcement leaders, which I'll speak to in a moment, and was unable to be there because I understand they asked for me and they wanted to speak with me. And I wish I could have been there. As soon as I left that press conference, I went there to meet with that group. Unfortunately, they had left and they had moved over to a different location. But I met with the leadership from LAPD that was there. And what they told me was that the group, recognizing that I wasn't available, asked for those, that leadership would take a knee with them, not to them. And nor were we asking them to take a knee to us. But we saw each other. We had a moment, as I understand it, of communication, of recognizing. I saw that, and I've referenced it last Saturday on Beverly, after a terrible aftermath of fire and destruction. But the group that wasn't necessarily, the largest group, not involved with that, just wanted to be heard. And they wanted to hear that we were willing to do that. And once that happened, that march remained peaceful, and we were able to leave. Tonight, as we approach the curfew, it is important that these protest groups end, that their actions, their words that we hear, not be drowned out now by not attending to the curfew. As we move into the evening, we have ample resources to not just protect our critical sites and protect our businesses and retails throughout this city, but also to ensure that those individuals who remain on our streets to prey upon our communities will be held accountable. I joined the law enforcement leaders of LA County today, by DA Lacey as well as City Attorney Fuhrer. And all of us are committed to hearing, recognizing, and acknowledging the failures of our past. But as we move forward, we must assure every member of our public of our unbending efforts to ensure your safety. The presence of the National Guard, the Safer at Home Directive, and now the curfew, and the mobilization of LAPD is our control factions to restore that. But I'll last close with what my remarks were this morning in another media engagement. And that is to these organizers, is for them to join with us in calling for peace and showing the volume of their power to be that agent that restores peace in our community, not by policing power, but by their power of talking to the community, those advocacy, those groups of needing social justice, of let's achieve that through peace. Tonight, as I close, I wish us a safe night, and I thank the men and women of LAPD and LA Fire and all of our first responders for their sacrifice, their dedication, their valor. I was able, and I'll announce, to meet with and see the release of a young officer whose skull was fractured Saturday night during one of these protests that turned violent. After metal plates and stitches and staples, by the grace of God and the power of surgery and medicine, he was able to survive those injuries and is now resting safely at home. I'm thankful for his survival. I am grateful for his service, as I am to every member of this of LAPD. Thank you.
Chief Terrell.
Thank you, Mayor. The men and women of the Los Angeles City Fire Department continue to protect the lives and property of the people of Los Angeles. We've been able to respond to hundreds of fire and medical calls in the protest areas in the past 4 days, while simultaneously responding to our daily average of 1,400 emergencies throughout the city. We've also sent firefighters to our fire service partners in the cities of Beverly Hills and Santa Monica who faced civil unrest this past weekend, and we're prepared to continue that support as needed. And we have done so without incurring any firefighter injuries. Our firefighters also continue to support the city's only active drive-through COVID testing site at Dodger Stadium, for which we have raised the capacity to 7,700 people per day. You can schedule an appointment for testing at coronavirus.lacity.org/testing. As I said yesterday, it is critical that our firefighters and paramedics are able to respond to emergencies to do their jobs without interference from protesting crowds. We respect the right to protest peacefully, but I ask you to make the right choice. When a fire engine or ambulance is trying to get to the scene of an emergency, to answer the call for help. Seconds count when a person has a heart attack or their home or business is engulfed with flames. Any delay of our firefighters can truly result in a life or death situation. The LAFD remains ready to protect the people of Los Angeles, and I ask everybody to abide by the 6 p.m. curfew that has been set for the city of Los Angeles so we can continue to do the very important job of keeping Los Angeles safe. Thank you.
Thank you, Chiefs. As we know, we're fighting masks that came here that we are sharing with our hospitals at cost are now in our warehouse. We've administered nearly 500,000 tests, as I mentioned, spent nearly $50 million to date on these tests. And we have been doing that both at the testing centers as well as on Skid Row and with people experiencing homelessness, and in now all of our senior skilled nursing facilities. Finally, we've handed out nearly $20 million in cash assistance through Angelino cards. We've also had business ambassadors who are working hard and through what we saw, the unrest, to be able to help businesses reopen at thousands, now over 2,800 different businesses, and served more than 1 million meals to seniors. We also have awarded microloans to our businesses now at $1.9 million, and we'll continue to push forward with those. I hope later in the week to share with you too in this moment, not only how we are addressing COVID-19, but to address some of the underlying calls for justice and for investments that are ongoing in our communities. Happy to answer questions about COVID-19 as well as, of course, what's at hand. But I thank you all for the work you will do to be safe tonight, to abide by the curfew, to stay at home also when you're allowed to be out whenever possible, and to move forward. With that, be happy now to answer questions.
All right, you've been listening to Mayor Eric Garcetti, as well as LAPD's Chief Michael Moore, as well as LA City Fire Chief Ralph Terrazas, all talking about the safety to try to restore and safety to the community. All three stress the importance of people adhering and abiding by the curfew, which will go into effect in about less than 15 minutes at 6 p.m. It will last until 6 a.m. So unless you're an essential worker or you need medical help, you need to stay home or go home.
And we'll have, of course, have more coverage on how effective that curfew is. We have our reporters fanned out across Southern California, and we know that this is a complicated issue. We want to give you a chance to make your voice heard. So please head to abc7.com to tell us why you protest. You can upload a video or picture or write us a paragraph. We want to hear you. We hope to share some of your responses on the air and online.
Also, now moving on, we have been seeing thousands of protesters gathering across the Southland this afternoon.
Inland Empire Bureau Chief Rob McMillan live now for us in Riverside, where a big group of protesters making their voices heard at this point as well. What are you seeing out there, Rob?
Well, very fortunate to report that it's a loud, large, and to this point, extremely peaceful protest here in downtown Riverside. People started gathering around 3 o'clock this afternoon in the park right across from the Mission Inn Hotel, and the crowd grew to close to 4,000 people, and around 4 o'clock, they poured out into the street. Now, interestingly enough, and we see this with a lot of the big protests around here, the police department has taken a very hands-off approach to this point. Riverside Police Department, as well as Riverside County Sheriff's Department and other agencies, is here in force, but they're not visible. In fact, we have seen very few police officers, with the exception of a few motorbikes that went by about 30 seconds ago, very few police officers here, and that's by design. I was speaking with a spokesperson with the Riverside Police Department who tells me that's what they're trying to do. They don't want to agitate any of these folks. They want to allow them to protest and do so peacefully, and it's been very loud, very large. We estimate close to 4,000 people out here right now. Obviously, they're in the streets. They shouldn't be doing that. But the Riverside Police Department content to let them have their way and exercise their voice. As we've been saying, I mean, you have a lot of people, decades and generations of pain and anger that have built up, and it's really spilled out over the past week. And so the police department content to allow these people to protest. Again, the curfew, though, is set to hit in about 10 minutes. So it will be interesting to see what happens when we hit that 6 o'clock curfew here in Riverside. But most would agree, a very peaceful protest at this point. I asked the police department, has there been any property damage or anything like that? They said only one report of a window broken out in a vehicle, but they haven't even been able to really investigate that yet. So at this point, very loud, but very peaceful in downtown Riverside. Rob McMillan, ABC 7 Eyewitness News.
All right, Rob, thank you very much. Let's take a look now. Here, of course, on the first night of the protesting, downtown LA was one of the focal points, and there were disturbances, there was violence. What we're seeing now has been largely peaceful, although there have been National Guard troops that have been stationed outside LA City Hall. And we're going to keep an eye on things now. Right now, there you see the curfew is about to begin in about 10 minutes in the city of Los Angeles. The mayor calling on people to come home, and you see a group of demonstrators here. Trying to see where this is. And you see police there lined up in front of it. That is LAPD headquarters. I thought it was, but I wanted to be sure of it before I said it. You've got some National Guard troops who are stationed there as well. And the protest, the demonstration here in front of LAPD headquarters, peaceful so far. I don't see any scuffles. I don't see anything going on there.
Yeah, and you see the National Guard right behind the LAPD officers. Again, we were talking about this. You see the National Guard out when they're deployed. You certainly know it's very serious. You can see one of the officers on a megaphone obviously talking to the crowd, but we do have that curfew. It goes into effect in about 8 minutes or so, so it will be interesting to see if this crowd disperses and does go home. And also what we've been seeing, many of the sort of landmarks that need to be protected, they've been putting up these steel barricades to keep people away, and they certainly have kept this this building and this environment very safe between the LAPD officers and the National Guard right behind them. So an added level of safety and security there.
And it's a literal representation of what the Guard is here to do. They are supposed to literally back up the LAPD, and you're seeing them actually physically doing that at this time. It's the police who are supposed to be on the front line facing off against demonstrators. You don't want military people doing that if you can possibly avoid it, not because they are not good people, but because they're not trained specifically for this sort of mission. And you've got police officers who are trained and who are trained in crowd control and how to work together in a situation such as this, and trained not to react, not to overreact, and that is the intention here. As we move on, the death that we have witnessed, the destruction that we have been witnessing is especially disturbing for children and teens. A USC specialist for what is called psychological first aid has 5 steps that can help children in these turbulent times. She shared them with Eyewitness News reporter Miriam Hernandez.
If you have been horrified by it all, a child trauma specialist says, imagine what it's doing to an impressionable mind.
Is this real? Can this really be happening? Can this happen to me?
From the death of George Floyd under the knee of a white officer.
If I can't trust the officer on the street, who do I trust?
Watch out! To the behavior of adults. Strategies for crisis recovery based on science have been honed at the USC School of Social Work. Yet this unrest is unlike any other, including the LA riots. Professor Holly Priebe-Sotelo says today's scenes on social media are unfiltered, inescapable, and damaging.
Even in 1992, when the civil unrest happened in South LA, today what we have is more exposure.
The response, a 5-step process called psychological first aid. 1, listen.
Making sure that you are listening without judgment, not interrupting them.
2, protect.
What do you need right now to feel safe?
3, connect with people who are comforting.
What would help you right now to feel connected again?
4, model calm behavior.
They are watching your tone of voice. They're watching the expressions on your face. They need to know that you are in control, even if you don't feel like you're in control. They need you to be their guide, their protector.
5, teach how to relax, be the calm.